A Song and a Snowflake by Alivia Fleur. So,
Yes,
what are you reading for us?
I'm going to be reading from this one, it's called A Song and a Snowflake. And I've picked this because the main male character in here is an Australian. So his name is Sinclair, he's from Melbourne, and he's traveled to London because he wants to make his name as a cordial maker and to set up a tavern and step out on his own. So I wanted to sort of do something that was very much me, and that he's from down under as well. So yes.
Awesome.
So in this section, he's met Charlize, who lives on Honeysuckle Street, and they run into each other on the street again after an initial meeting. And he's wanting to find his great grandparents who are buried in Kensal Green, which is one of the cemeteries on the edge of London. And he doesn't know how to get there. So Charlize and her sister Elise are going to have shown him the way so that he can find them. So
Awesome. Sounds great.
the small field of green grass and stone slabs, which had once been at the edge of the bustling expanse of London, lay tucked behind a tall white arch. Progress nibbled at its edges, but inside Kensal Green Cemetery, the congestion and noise of the city seemed to have been banished. The black fingers of branches stretched across the grey sky, and beneath their feet, the matted brown and decomposing autumn leaves muffled each step. Angels, oak leaves, sphinxes, Grecian urns, simple columns. The sculptures of the dead jarred, not because they were alien, but because they were so similar to the graves that surrounded his grandmother where she was buried at Melbourne General Cemetery. What name? Elise called, her voice echoing into the crisp silence. Brown, Sinclair replied. Elise turned, hand on hips. What other name? A Christian name. Mary. Sinclair tapped at the tobacco tin secreted in his coat pocket. Same as my grandma's name, and my mother. Elise ran off again. Beside him, Charlize slowed to his pace. Occasionally, the rhythm of their walk caused them to nudge one another, and each brush of her body against his sent a shimmer through him. If the world were a page, she was a poem imprinted. No, not a poem, a song. She moved like notes lived in her, and as he fell into step, he could feel the beat. Step, step, step. While his heart thudded louder and in its own silent tune, ba-boom, ba-bing. Dappled shadows danced over her gown, and thin fingers of mottled grey and light snaked through her hair. My sister was meant to be named Mary to keep the tradition going, he said, knowing he was veering into babbling, but unable to stop. But my brother Richard kept calling her Scary Mary because she cried so much. When my dad went to register her birth, he stopped to celebrate on the way, and when he came home, it turned out he'd registered her as Sari by mistake. He buried his hands in his coat pockets, regretted his lack of gloves, and studied the dates on the headstones as they passed, then stole a glance, his cheeks warming as they both slung a look at one another in the same instance, only to look away, embarrassed. I liked your wailing, he blurted out, then winced. I mean, your wassailing. Last night, before that daft man's horse got loose, I was mesmerised. Her lips broke into a shy smile. No one says wassailing anymore. We're just carolers. It's my aunt's ensemble. She's very passionate about music and singing. She was in a choir with my mother. It's how her and my father met. Love at first lyric? He asked, his skin tingling at the thought. Not quite, she quipped back, but in time, yes, he adored her. I could adore you, Sinclair thought, his gaze trailing the naked grace of her nape, inching to the tickle of fur at her coat collar, at least twice a night. He coughed and rubbed his knuckles over his forehead. The more he tried to act like a well-mannered gent, the bigger of an oaf he seemed intent on becoming. Over here, Elise called from a few rows over, and Sinclair followed her voice. Mary Brown, 1835. Philip Brown, 1837. Parents of Mary. Gone but not forgotten. Is it them? Does it really say that? He asked. Come see, Elise replied. Gone but not forgotten. His mother had chosen the same line for his grandmother, complete with an English rose carved into the top of the headstone, almost identical to the design that stared back at him in this freezing English yard so very far from home. My grandmother was a convict, the words scratched out of him, as harsh as their history. She couldn't write, so she had the priest help her send letters home, but the only reply she ever got back was from the vicar, telling her they died and been buried here. She thought they'd forsaken her, but maybe, reading that stone, they didn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tobacco tin, then pushed his nails against the tin lip and, fingers tensing, cracked the little container open. What beautiful hands he had, not soft or lithe from doing nothing more vexatious than holding a pen or a hand of cards, but firm hands built from work. Thin veins snaked over their back, a hard-worn nail flush against a slightly rough thumb, and while every inch of them spoke of effort and might, he held the tin like a child might raise up a favourite toy or a comforting blanket. Charlize couldn't help but lean closer, desperate to learn a little more of this man who was 3 parts hard as macadam and 1 part soft as flannel. My grandma's last words to me, he said, his voice an ache, before she slipped away. She made me promise I would one day bring a piece of her home. Nestled in the tin lay a delicate silver hook of grey hair tied with a thin blue ribbon. His finger grazed, barely touching it, his face distorting into a mix of pain spliced with love. It was the last thing she ever said. He squatted at the base of the grave and scratched at the ground, carving out a little cavity in the dark soil, his movements mechanical. Dirt caught along the sides of his fingers and beneath his nails. Charlize stripped her gloves, knelt beside him and clawed at the earth with him. Cold, almost frozen and rough with grit, the soil rubbed hard, refreshing in its rawness. How many holes had they dug to plant roses as children? How many weeds had they pulled from the garden? How much distance had been placed between her and the beauty of the ground since her mother's loss? Charlize scooped out one last handful of tumbling soil, then heaped it into a little pile. Sinclair placed the lock in the depression, then kissed his fingers and raised them to the sky. In the next life, Mary Brown, he whispered, and with a firm shove, heaped the dirt over. He remained still, sitting back on his heels, head bowed. The wind whispered through the few remaining leaves and ruffled his hair. Charlize let the coldness infiltrate her, and the frostiness made her fingers tingle. If she stayed here, would she turn to ice? Perhaps she would become a statue amongst the angels, bowing her head in repentance, praying for the redemption that would only come at the end of a church aisle. A cheerful trill broke the silence. Above them, a robin chirped as it hopped between branches, and little plumes of mist escaped from its beak. Another bird called back in reply, and the pair of redbreasts bounced between the naked branches before taking wing to the other side of the path. I think she's happy, Elise said, following the flight of the birds across the cemetery, a smile in her voice, even though it carried a weight beyond her years. Do you think that's your grandfather flying with her? Sinclair huffed a laugh as he stood and brushed the dirt from his palms. I doubt it. She didn't know him that well. Actually, I'm not sure she knew him at all. How could she not? We really should leave Mr. McIntyre to his mourning, Charlize interrupted her sister, trying to send her a message to hold her tongue. Realization lit Elise's expression. Sinclair shoved his hands into his pocket. It doesn't bother me. My grandmother's story, and my mother not having a father. Well, not one that gave her a name. Charlize's cheeks burned hot as she tried to find the right etiquette to cover a blunder like the one she had just made. How many books had she pored over? How many lessons from father to ensure she didn't stand out in a parlour once she entered society? Nothing she had learned covered what to do when someone wasn't embarrassed about such things, yet she had just told him he should be. An unconventional situation called for an unconventional answer. She stood, then held out her elbow. Why don't you escort us to the gates and tell us about her on the way? Strips of light crossed Charlize's skirt as they strolled, while Elise flitted along the path as light as one of the robins. For a man not wearing gloves, heat still beat from his light hold around her bicep, each tiny indentation of his fingers like a brand through her sleeve. A warm fizzle traced her spine. She should declare herself promised, but apart from accepting their offer of assistance, what right did she have to assume he thought anything more of her? Would she embarrass him again with her arrogance? And she couldn't shake the thought that perhaps, if everything hadn't gone so horribly wrong, this is what courting would have been like, all shy smiles and fumbled etiquette. Was there any harm in just enjoying this moment? "I'd prefer you call me Sinclair," he said, his voice a warm drizzle through the cold air. "My father is Mr. McIntyre. It doesn't sound right to my ears." "Call me Charlize," she said, half turning towards him. "Your grandmother sounds fascinating." He laughed, and she could hear the easing of the burden in his voice. She was something. I suppose she had to be. She was transported at 18. Because of her relationships? That came later, he said, shaking his head. And I think it was just one or two redcoat gents she became friendly with, just enough to help her get by. Her crime was breaking stocking machines in Leicestershire when steam engines put families out of work. She was protesting the changes that made her family homeless and drove whole villages into the city to look for work. But if you think my grandmother is something, she's barely a speck on my mother, he continued, his voice thick with pride. She was 16 when she married my father, and only a few years older than the boys she was to become a mother to. And they gave her a time, but she stuck with it. And now they're like a bunch of kittens around her, meek as you please. "Was your father transported too?" she asked, her curiosity edging out all thoughts of proper conversation. "No, although he may well have been for all the choice he and his first wife had. The laird had the whole village cleared out and paid everyone's passage to the other side of the world. A new start," he said, even though they'd never wanted to go. So the illustrious heritage of Sinclair McIntyre includes a rebellious convict grandmother from Leicestershire, an illegitimate mother, and a Scottish father turned out in the clearances. She tapped off each point as she spoke. It was a mismatch of composite parts, every single piece at odds with what was considered respectable and desirous to men like her father and the Baron. Yet she'd never felt more comfortable in another's company. "And you sound like any gent I've met in a ballroom." "My mother insisted Sarah and I be educated, not at home like the boys." His rounded accent, formal English tinted with the old clipped word, settled into the confession. "We're quite the conversation at home. My mother sounding as rough as any street urchin, and my father and brother's brogues as thick as if they'd just walk out of the Highlands, and Sarah and I like a proper pair of toffs, even though she spends her days bottling and boiling in the kitchen, and I spend mine in the warehouse dodging horses."
The Earl's Egyptian Heiress by Heba Helmy.
So I'm reading a little bit from The Earl's Egyptian Heiress, which debuted last year, actually, and it was my debut, so I thought I'd read from it today.
Yay, I'm excited.
Thank you. I'm
Is there
excited.
anything we need to know about the scene?
So this scene happens around, so Rania, who's the Egyptian female main character, POV, she's gone to England to find some things out with the Earl of Warrington. And, she's left Egypt and she lands in England. And this is a dinner party. She's thrown into a dinner party. So this is a dinner party scene. And this is her reaction to this scene. And Owen is the main POV, and she knows him as half Egyptian, half British. And so she's seen him in Egypt. She knows what he's like in Egypt, but here he's the Earl of Warrington, and he's very much in his, Earlness, so to speak. And so this is the dinner party scene.
Awesome. Take it
Okay.
away.
Thank you. Rania gritted her teeth. through the conversation that followed around British relations with India. Did these people truly believe they were better than everyone else in the world? Maybe they thought they were doing good, buying spices from India or cotton from Egypt, while offering language and education in places like Mr. March's school or through their missionary work. Yet, for all their airs, they did not realize how much they depended on the labor of those they termed barbaric, or that their assumptions about people who were not like them might be completely wrong. Rania wished she could call them out on their prejudice, but being a guest at their supper party stilled her tongue. Until the main course came in, a roasted pig. The skin was crispy and there was an apple in its mouth. How would people ever eat it, looking like that? She clapped both hands over her mouth to stop herself being sick, then pushed her chair back, knocking cutlery to the ground. It was like the first day on the yacht with Owen before Rania had gotten her sea legs, except they weren't alone so he could hold her hand, stand at her back as an anchor, solid, warm. Apologies. Pig is forbidden in my faith, she managed to mumble after she'd calmed a bit. I am not accustomed to seeing it like this. Lady Elizabeth sneered. I had forgotten Mohammedans do not consume pork, and yet they don't have a problem with camel meat. The other woman's prejudice was too much for Rania. She stood abruptly, backing away from the pig, refusing to look at it again. The men stood too, out of decorum, but it was Owen who rounded the table. I'm sorry, I should have seen to the menu myself. He stared pointedly at the Countess. Excuse my ignorance, Miss Radwan, she offered. Pardon it this time, and it shall not happen again for the duration of your stay. Please, Owen addressed one of the servants, pass a message along to the kitchens not to serve any pork. Only lamb, chicken, or duck. Yes, my lord. Also, please remove the platter to a side table and slice the pork there. You may serve it to our guests banquet fashion, as in luncheon. The countess made an objecting sound, but said nothing as the servant complied. And in the bustle of the changes being made to the table, Owen led Rania to a quiet corner of the dining room. I'm sorry, all this, a supper party, the customs, it would be overwhelming even if the guests weren't so rude and ignorant. His kindness made her tearful, and she had to bite her lip to stop the flood of emotion. She wished she could tell him that she had no problem with him, that in fact she wished they were alone, even though she shouldn't. Behind his back, Rania caught a glimpse of Miss Charlotte, frowning, fretful. Then the dining room stilled, conversation ceased, and all stood over their filled plates, whether they were waiting for the head of the table to return or trying to overhear what he was saying to her, she could not be sure. When the Countess called his name and Owen ignored her, his attention still completely on Rania, she'd have been lying if she tried to deny how powerful she felt, how much it boosted her. They're waiting for you, she said softly. Maybe I should excuse myself. It's important to me that you feel welcome here, but if you would like to go, you may, certainly. Molly will bring you a tray. She met his gaze. But you would rather I stayed? Most ardently, he nodded, and bit down lightly on his lower lip. Rania didn't know what daring possessed her when she saw that. Sit me next to you, then. He nodded before turning, and then moved to place a hand on Sir Henry's shoulder. Would you mind exchanging your place with Miss Radwan? I think it prudent to have her near me. She would have liked him to move Miss Charlotte instead, but it was fine. It was still a victory, being next to him and having him refuse to eat any of the main dish with her, pushing away the wine when he realized that it was something she wasn't drinking. Having the Earl of Warrington pay her such exquisite attention made Rania feel as if she were flying, as if she couldn't be hurt or shamed by anyone else at that table. But that didn't mean that there weren't moments when she felt as if her wings had been clipped and she was falling, quickly, spinning, giddy. When his knee scraped against hers under the tablecloth, or the tip of his shoe nudged the tip of hers, the intimacy and the benign act of bringing his fork close to her plate to recommend or comment on the food. Try the Brussels sprouts dipped in the mustard dressing. Or, doesn't the blancmange remind you of mahalabeya pudding, but with vanilla instead of blossom powder? With the contortions of the candlelight, it was like seeing him anew. this version of Iskandar that was Owen in front of others. It made her heart pound with the danger of it. And even though others tried to get their attention throughout the meal, it was hard to do. Sir Henry tried twice to ask if she knew the place where the Rosetta Stone was found. Yes, very well. The fort is central in the town named for it. We call it Rashid. The French like to claim they found it, he said. But an old army friend of mine, whose father was with Admiral Nelson when he fought Napoleon's forces in Egypt, claimed one of his savants was led to it by a local peasant girl he had fallen madly in love with. He's right, Rania agreed. According to local legend, she was more than just the Fallaha. She was the siren jinn of the Nile and Nadaha, who, with her beauty and song, could lure men to a watery death. It is said that the Nadaha would sometimes use her voice to possess a human body, and as far back as any can remember, she'd use the women of a particular family as vessels for her immortality. Maybe she fell in love with that savant of Napoleon's, or maybe they drowned together. Neither was ever heard from again. Fascinating. Sir Henry practically clapped while his wife mumbled something that sounded like hogwash to their daughter. Rania dismissed it as a reference to the meal they had eaten. As for Owen, he only exhaled, loud and deep, a breath she felt in her own chest.
The Rose of Granborough Park by Evelin Laczi.
The next day, Jo awoke with a resolute vow to work on her project. She could not lose sight of why she was in Granborough Park. Nicholas Blackstone was an unwelcome side effect to her true agenda, the coveted mentorship. She still had 2.5 weeks to finish this project, and she would have been damned to let that time go to waste. She had excused herself early the previous evening to draft sketches for the house. That was the first step of this agenda. The Blackstones had some old furniture that could be incorporated into the public spaces. A few armchairs, a grandfather clock, and 2 grand bookcases. She had finished planning that yesterday. Today, she was to work on the bedrooms. Jo hoped for a few minutes alone with Nicholas to discuss the budget and his preferences for his bedroom and study. Doing this would not have been her first choice in this case. Staying alone with him was perilous, considering the peculiar feelings he stirred within her lately. However, as the man of the house, his approval was crucial for the upcoming decisions. Jo prepared herself for a strictly professional exchange. No drifting into memories of a certain dance or the accidental hand-holding incident in the workshop. Absolutely not. And she most definitely wouldn't dwell on the strange discomfort she felt by seeing him with Miss Violet. It was the peak of unprofessionalism. She was here to work, not pine. After finishing her breakfast, clad in her no-nonsense gray dress, a sartorial testament to her determination to keep things strictly professional, Jo approached Nicholas's study with the resolve of a general marching into battle. She had mentally rehearsed her rules. No more accidental touches, no getting lost in deep gazes, business only. Outside Nicholas's study, heart pounding with anticipation, she knocked 3 times. Come in. Jo entered, her steps measured. She had sent Nicholas a note the previous evening with the butler, politely declining dinner in favor of a solitary meal in her room and setting the time for this meeting. She spotted the note on his desk as she walked in, its presence there oddly reassuring. At least he'd read it. The study was snug, its walls lined with bookcases groaning under the weight of numerous volumes. Some she recognized, while others were completely foreign to her. Nicholas's desk sat amidst this chaos, a lone island in a sea of papers and books, suggesting that meticulous organization wasn't exactly his forte. Miss Metzger. Nicholas stood up as Jo entered, his movement fluid as he bowed. His attire was casual, yet impeccably tailored, with light trousers and a morning coat hinting at a recent return from the outdoors. Jo offered a curtsy, her eyes still roving around the room, taking in the sea of books. "Good morning, Mr. Blackstone," she said. She was noting all the details of the space. The original hardwood floors were visible, lacking carpets. The wallpaper, peeling at the seams, appeared at least 30 years old. That would have to be remedied soon. "You seem to already have strong opinions about this room," Nicholas remarked, leaning back against his desk with his arms crossed. The faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, almost teasing. Oh, they were definitely not off to a good start. His smiles had an unexpected effect on her. There was no way to tell how this visit would turn out if this continued. Well, you have an impressive collection of books, Jo observed, her gaze finally meeting Nicholas's. True to form, he was watching her intently. I thought Granborough Park had a separate library. It does, Nicholas nodded, but I prefer being surrounded by books. It seems my uncle shared the sentiment, given the abundance here. A passion for books is something we have in common, then, Jo responded, her tone infused with genuine warmth. You're quite fortunate to have such a diverse collection. I've never had enough space for all the books I wish to obtain. He didn't respond directly, but diverted his gaze to his shoes, an almost boyish shyness about him. Jo wondered if this softer side was a private aspect of himself, concealed behind the door of his office. I wanted to discuss my plans for decorating your home. Jo quickly cleared her throat and decided that to keep herself to her rules, she had to stop being distracted from the task at hand. You've already talked with my father about the general finances, but I need to know your budget for each room's decor. Typically, discussing finances was a matter she would handle with the ladies of the household, room by room, after they had already come to an agreement with their husbands, of course. The idea of having this conversation with a man was not simply unusual, it was almost revolutionary. She braced herself, hoping Mr. Blackstone wouldn't be like most men in this regard. But then again, expecting a man to engage in such detailed discussions about home decor with a woman might have been a bit of a tall order. The sum I agreed on with Mr. Metzger was £200. That includes the drawing room. What's left for the bedrooms, I believe, is about £130, Nicholas said casually, as if discussing something mundane. Jo swallowed hard. Papa told her to let her imagination loose and not feel constricted, but that figure was leagues beyond what she had anticipated. She had been under the impression that the Blackstones were struggling financially, but now she saw he had a very different understanding of a financial struggle than Jo. She fought to maintain her composure, though internally she was doing a dance of astonishment and glee. Would that be sufficient? More than sufficient, indeed, she said, her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. She really would not have to hold back on her most ambitious designs. Her only constraint was the lack of time. You will have the highest quality of everything, I assure you. That's settled, then. His casual note sealed the deal, and the momentary silence enveloped them, their gazes inadvertently intertwining. This more relaxed, almost approachable Nicholas was quite disarming. Do you have any particular ideas for your office? Jo ventured, her voice betraying a hint of vulnerability. She mentally kicked herself. Why did he have to have such a perplexing impact on her? She was here to discuss wallpapers, carpets, and the such, not unravel the mysteries of Nicholas Blackstone's character. I'm quite fond of it as it is, but I would still love to see it in a better shape, he said, his hand gliding over the wallpaper with an unexpected gentleness. Jo caught herself momentarily entranced by the movement of his hand, her imagination running a tad too wild. She had to stop thinking about touching him. I would rather relocate most of my bedroom's budget to my office. Perhaps it could receive a carpet and new wallpaper. I remember looking through the catalog you provided at the upholstery. The memory of their hands touching in the workshop resurfaced, exactly what Jo had hoped to avoid. She couldn't help but feel he was intentionally reminding her of the moment. What an infuriating man. Did anything in the catalog catch your eye? Jo asked, her voice slightly strangled. The air seemed to thin with his proximity, a fact he appeared to notice as he halted his advance. Yes, he replied, his voice taking on a deeper tone that did absolutely nothing to hide Jo's flustered state. I marked a few options. He retrieved the catalog from his jacket pocket and held it out to her with a slow, almost inviting move. Taking it, Jo felt mortified by the tremor in her hand. The paper was still warm from his touch and its proximity to his body. Would he be this warm to snuggle against? Get a hold of yourself, woman, she chided herself, swallowing hard as she tore his gaze from him and stared at the floor instead. Miss Metzger, are you frightened of me? Nicholas inquired, his brows knitting together in a mix of concern and confusion as his hand retreated. No, of course not, she replied, mastering a semblance of confidence. Why would I be? She added, though her inner voice listed at least 3 solid reasons. However, Nicholas, seemingly unfazed by her response, stepped closer, his gaze scrutinizing her. This close, she could see the minute details of his face, the freckles, the depth of his irises. He was uncomfortably near, but a part of her longed for him to get even nearer. Her resolve to focus on business was rapidly deteriorating. You are trembling, he noted, his voice gentle. Would you like to sit? Jo averted her eyes, focusing on regaining control over her wayward voice. No, thank you, she responded, her gaze accidentally catching his before darting to the safety of his jacket. I'd rather discuss your bedroom. As the words stumbled out, Jo wished for the ground to open up and swallow her. The unintended double entendre painted her cheeks a shade of crimson that could rival the most vibrant wallpaper sample in the catalog she was clutching. Even from the corner of her eyes, she could see the surprise on Nicholas's face. My bedroom. Jo inwardly cringed. How could she continue for 3 more weeks after such a blunder? Decorating your bedroom, she corrected, forcing a strained smile. You said you would rather not spend money on it, but I think we can split your generous budget between your bedroom and your office with ease. Nicholas's broad grin indicated he was relishing her discomfort. It was at that moment Jo decided Nicholas Blackstone was a fiend in gentleman's clothing, her sworn adversary, not the object of any sort of affection. It was easier said than done, Jo had to admit to herself. I must say, Miss Metzger, you are quite charming when embarrassed, he remarked, turning back to his desk. Jo blushed anew, this time out of frustration and self-consciousness. She stood silently, her mind racing as Nicholas eased back into his chair with a casualness that belied the tension in the room. My bedroom is in quite good condition, actually. I spent such little time there that I think it is sufficient for now. Of course, he paused, his smile way more suggestive than it would be appropriate. You are welcome to see it yourself, if you wish. Jo felt as if her face might spontaneously combust. This had to stop. He was a gentleman, wasn't he? Engaged, no less. Yet here he was, throwing propriety to the wind with his flirtatious banter. And worse, why did every teasing word from him send her heart into a tizzy? My lord, I appreciate light-hearted jesting, but you are crossing a line, Jo said, striving to appear as stern as possible. Her not being able to look him in the eye must have severely undermined the seriousness of her words, though. She could not help it. Looking at him made it way too tempting to allow this flirtation to continue, and that was simply out of the question. I apologize, he replied immediately, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I spoke without considering the implications. It won't happen again. Thank you. Jo sighed and finally felt the blood slowly trickle back from her face to the rest of her body. She watched from under her lashes as he shuffled some papers around on his desk. Though I must admit, it's been a long time since I've conversed so openly with anyone, Nick added, his smile sincere and devoid of jest. And I'm not referring to the flirting, just the conversation. Jo paused for a second, trying to decide if he was jesting with her again. He seemed genuine, shedding the stern facade of Nicholas Blackstone for a more approachable demeanor. Simply Nicholas. You certainly seem more at ease, Jo observed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. I admit you are not the easiest person to read. You are far more affable in private. Are you flirting with me now, Miss Metzger? He quipped, a smirk playing on his lips. Jo couldn't help but laugh at the suggestion. It was merely a compliment. His smirk softened into a gentle smile, though a veil of caution remained in his eyes. Perhaps he was wary of revealing too much of himself. Thank you, he finally said with a small nod. I find you quite affable myself. Jo blushed this time from a sense of warmth rather than embarrassment. Sensing the conversation drawing to a close, she curtsied swiftly. He nodded in acknowledgement, and she turned to leave the room, her heart racing. What effect was Nicholas Blackstone having on her?
I hope you enjoyed those Victorian romance story samples. Don't forget to subscribe to the Historical Romance Sampler on YouTube or wherever you catch your podcasts so you get weekly episodes in your feed. We will be back with regular episodes on August 7th, starting with best-selling Victorian romance author Elizabeth Everett. Until then, happy reading!